In August of 2016, prolonged rainfall from an unpredictable storm resulted in catastrophic flooding in the state of Louisiana. In my city of Denham Springs, 90% of the homes received water, some 4,200 homes. Of those, 3,000 of these homes received 18 inches or more of water, 25 to 30 inches of rain in less than 72 hours. The Amite River, which cuts through the heart of Livingston Parish, crested at 46.2 feet, some 5 feet above its previously recorded record and some 17.2 feet above its flood stage at Denham Springs. This is my story, as it was experienced through my own eyes, the day I saw the river rise. Hey everyone, it's Jim Chapman, and I'm back with episode 5 of The Day I Saw the River Rise. And if you'll remember in episode 4 where I left you, with that episode, I was going down Highway 16 after a 9+ hour time away trying to search for help for my father-in-law, who at the point when I left was in the back of a truck on Highway 16, sun shining, and he wasn't doing well. So at that point I decided to leave, go try to find some help. I had a friend who lived 4 or 5 miles from where we were. I was going to walk that distance through this flood water and try to do what I could to get some help. And so during that time, during that 9 hours away, a lot of things happened that I had no idea of until I got back. And some of it I honestly had no idea of until yesterday when I kind of interviewed my wife about it. And so she's here today. So first of all, say hello, Wendy Chapman.
Hey, how's it going?
To everyone out there, and she's going to kind of tell that side of the story, because obviously I was not there during any of that. And let me tell you, folks, this is pretty amazing what you're about to hear. Now, if you'll remember when I left you last, I had finally made it back after this ordeal, and I see my wife, my kids, but I don't see my father-in-law. I don't see my mother-in-law. My father-in-law was immobile. So my first question was, where in the hell is your father? And she kind of went into the story of what happened, not in great detail, but we're going to go into great detail today and let you know about that rescue. So Wendy, I guess kind of take it from there, start from the beginning. What was your first thoughts kind of when I left and was headed down that road? This was it was early in the morning. It was about probably an hour after we had gotten him out on a boat out of his house, and we had placed him in the back of a truck. He was bedridden. He had Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia, so bedridden, could not speak. And he's in the back of this truck, and that's when I left. So kind of take it from there and tell me what happened.
So I'm in the back of the truck with Dad. He's on, y'all had brought the mattress he was on because he had to have something to lay on. So you decide to tell me that you're going to look for Brian. And I felt like lots of things were ripped away at that time. I was scared. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want you to leave. I knew you had to. I also didn't know it'd be lots of water on their end. Thought you'd just walk through it, knee deep, maybe, no big deal. After you left, I could tell Dad was starting to get hot. His body temperature with the disease at that time did not work very well. So you always had to keep him cool. So the sun's, it's morning time, the sun's already out, and it's starting to get hot, and you can tell his face is getting red. So I started to do with all we had. Mom had brought some rags, and we had a bottle of water. There was pouring water on the rag to try to wipe his face and cool him down. And at this time, he didn't have a shirt on, unless he had a tank top. I can't remember. And then he had a sheet covered up. So I'm trying to move some things, but at the same time, I don't want him to get sunburned either. And so I asked the neighbor whose dad's in the back of the truck if we can move under the covered area of the gas station across the street.
Which is the covered awning that you would get gas and fill up your vehicles.
So that provided him out of the sunlight. But at the same time, he's hot, and I can tell. So I just continued to do that. I also, at that time, we were giving him water through a syringe. That's the only way he could drink things at the time. So I just kind of kept with the fluids as best I could. Mom was kind of running around with the kid, watching the kids. We kind of kept everybody right there by the truck. Time just kind of stood still, so I don't really know the time frame this happened, but I know it was starting. It had to have been a couple of hours.
So he's still in the back of that truck. Y'all just basically moved the truck under that.
Yes, it's not like you can put him in a wheelchair. You can't do any of that. It has to stay,
flat,
laid back.
Right.
So all of a sudden, we're just discussing, what to do. When is Jimmy coming back? We're hoping we could get him to someone's house instead. It's just so many unknowns, and you're scared and you don't know what to do. They had the National Guard come, put some people in the back end, and they left.
And these were the
early?
These were the National Guard trucks that have the big covered tarps on the back, and you can put, say, 50 people back there.
Correct.
Those kind of things. Okay.
They had left early with one group of people, and then they came back by the time the next set of events occurred. So they had the back end open. There was lots of people with, I don't remember them being in wheelchairs, but they were in walkers and stuff like that. So they're taking the older people that couldn't get around very well. They were bringing them to an unknown place.
A shelter of some sort.
Some shelter, didn't know where. And then at this point, I was thinking, do I put them in there? What do we do? And then at this point, I also find out, once you get to the shelter, it's on you how to get back to where you need to be. So that I didn't think was a great idea. But at this point, I'm still not knowing what to do and trying to make the best decisions. Also, out of nowhere, there was this helicopter coming to pick people, rescue people.
And this was just to interject here for a second, I witnessed this before I left. It seemed like at first light, there were a lot of helicopters, and these were Coast Guard helicopters. They weren't Army helicopters. And they were actually dropping buckets. And there was an apartment complex that runs right beside where my neighborhood is. And they were literally plucking people off the second stories of these apartment complexes because it was inundating. There's 6 feet of water in those things. So everybody that lived on the first floor basically went up to the second floor of that apartment complex, and I would imagine they were in breezeways and stuff and on the railings. And this helicopter, I remember watching it, and it seemed so surreal because, I mean, these heroes would come down literally on like zip lines, and they didn't even have buckets when I saw them. I'm sure they had got some buckets later on, but they were hooking people up to them physically and just shooting back up that line. And so that I saw occurring in that morning, but they were, they did it a few times, and then I didn't see them again. And that was right before I left. So please continue.
Right. And then now keep in mind, the night before we had called the 911 and different numbers trying to see, can someone come get him out, bring him somewhere. But, none of that occurred. So this helicopter was one of those. It just didn't have a basket attached to it. It was as if they were taking people that, say, were injured and leave. This just so happened to land in the grassy area next door to Walmart, which kind of backs up to Eastover. So that little ground they were using as this. So I'm assuming they're going to do this more than once in the day. This occurred only this one time. So as we're watching all these things unfold, wondering what they're doing, wondering how I could get him on there, where it was even going, didn't know. We look over at Dad, and all of a sudden he's appearing to be very red and hot and almost looking like he was having a seizure. So all out of the blue, out of nowhere, I don't know the man's name. He just, I don't know who went and got him, or maybe we hollered for help maybe, and the man come. Because I know my mother was totally distraught at this point. And so he come over and he said he was a doctor. He proceeded to say, that's exactly what looked like was occurring because he is so hot. So at this point, they're hollering for people to hand over any kind of, say, cool water bottles at the time, and we were putting those under his arms to try to cool him off. He told me at that time he needs to get out of here. Of course, I'm thinking in my head, no duh. So at this point, my mom was like, what does that mean? And I'm like, you need to go, basically. So he says, let me go across the street. I'll be right back. So we stay there, waiting patiently for him to come back. Once he did, he had said at that point, I have you a ride. Only he can go. And I said at that point, he can't be the only one that goes. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. He does nothing. She has to go with him. There's no other way. So he's like, okay, that's fine. But she can bring anything that we had. We had packed all kinds of things that he needed in a rolling bag at that time. But we weren't allowed to bring any of that. And my mother is extremely distraught. I can't leave. What do I do? I said, you have to go with him. You have to take care of him. You have to go and get out of this. So they came over with a stretcher, put him on it. We left his mattress in the back of the truck. Told them goodbye. And at that point, I watched him fly away. Not knowing where they were going, what was going to happen. Jimmy was not there. So I felt so alone. Even though I had the 3 kids, it was so hard. It was so hard being so scared what's going to happen to him. I wanted him to be okay. I knew that was the right thing to do because he needed medical attention. But at the same time, you want to be there too.
So when they took him up, I mean, this was a traditional rescue where did they put him on the helicopter, or did the helicopter hover? And
no, he was in it.
He was in it. Okay, so they had landed,
and she was allowed to sit in there with him.
Gotcha.
The helicopter never come back, and there was never another one the rest of the day.
And to kind of tell you, how difficult these stories are to communicate. Until yesterday, I didn't ever realize. I knew that he had been rescued via helicopter. I never realized it landed. I thought they took them up on the bucket. So here we are 6 years later and still learning things about that flood.
They, you know, the crazy thing was it was the only one that landed there. And it was once they left, I just started crying. Of course, the kids try to console you, and you're trying to be the brave one for them. But he was the worst one out there. Honestly, they had some poor little pitiful people that, you know, were sitting on their walkers and things like that. But Dad was literally the worst one out there at the time. Next thing, I sat there and watched all those people get in the back of the National Guard truck. They filled as many people in there as they could or who wanted to go. And they took off down the road. And I just sat there thinking, oh, wow. So I, in my head, is thinking they're going to drop people off and come back. They never came back. Never the rest of the day till we left there did anyone ever come back.
Yeah, so, and that's you know, that's shows you the great work of God there. That I fully believe her dad would have never made it on that road, probably throughout the day. It was the primary reason I left. Something told me this guy is not going to make it out here. And, you know, I felt this overwhelming responsibility that I've got to get him out of here no matter what. And my only option at that point was to leave. Now put yourself in my position. I've got 3 kids, young at that time. I mean, my girls were 10. My son was 12. My wife, my father-in-law, who is immobile, bedridden, has, you know, essentially can only lay there, and my mother-in-law. And I had to make a decision to leave them, and that I'm hoping will paint the seriousness of that situation, because that was not an easy decision. That's the last thing you want to do, right? Is separate in a situation like that, because I knew there was a strong likelihood that by the time I got back, they would be gone, i.e. a shelter, you know, and there was no communication in those days. So I wouldn't have known which shelter. I wouldn't have been able to get there anyway, in all likelihood. And it could, you know, in my mind, it could be weeks. It could be weeks before I even found out where they were. So that's how serious that situation was. It was so serious that I had to make the decision to just go and try to find that help. Obviously, I didn't realize the seriousness of the situation I put myself in, as and you can go back and listen to episode 4, and that is my description of what I went through trying to find that help. But let's get back, Wendy, to, he leaves, and thank God for that, because he was in the best place he could be in. Where did they bring him?
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know where he was going. There was a number of hospitals they could have went to. They could not tell me where they were going.
Yes, and put yourself in that situation, folks. Your mom and dad just take off in a helicopter, and you have no idea where they're going. Now they're safe, and there was probably a little bit of relief there for you that that responsibility now was lifted. Yes. And I can tell you, when I came back, and I said, "Where's your dad?" And my wife shared that story with me. There was a huge weight lifted off of me just from the fact of that's 2 less people that I have to be concerned with, and I was taking all that responsibility on me and my shoulders, and also he's safe. I knew that he's in a hospital somewhere. I knew that's where they were going. I just didn't know which hospital. So there was a time frame, hours and hours, that you're out there. There's no one that at that point out there on that road. It's just kind of like people, What was the situation like after he left?
So there more people ended up coming under the covered area of the gas station, just trying to get out of the sun.
It was hot.
Then the gas station, of course, had no electricity, but, people needed a bathroom, so you could line up at the door. They only let so many people in the door.
They were only taking cash.
You could get drinks, but with only cash, and you could use the restroom. But hours and hours had passed before I got in line for any of that. I kept looking down the street, thinking any minute now he's going to come back. He's going to come back. And then I'm thinking, what do I do if he's not? I got 3 kids and a dog. What the heck? I tried to grab as much snacks that I could with me before we left out the house that morning, just for the kids. I don't even remember if you left me cash, because I don't even remember getting any drinks or anything at the store. Hours had passed. It was so hot. And then towards the end, I kept thinking, well, is somebody coming back? Do I take the kids and get on one of those trucks? But then how would I get a hold of you? How would you get me? There are so many things that go through your mind, and you're trying to make the right decision. And then all of a sudden, and this had been hours, I had been just watching the road, watching other people. People have their animals. They have their kids, and everybody thinking the same thing. Everybody just sitting, waiting on someone. And then my kids had a teacher that they just absolutely love. And I love her to death. And to this day, I thank God for her and her husband and her daughter. And as Karen Messina Smith and Rob Smith and Morgan. All of a sudden I saw them, and we hugged and we talked about what had happened. And she's like, why don't y'all come over here? And they were kind of to the side under the trees, because they also had a dog at that time. And I thought, thank God, somebody I know. I had her watch the kids while I went to the restroom, and maybe I got drinks. I don't know what I did at that time. I was just thinking a weight had been lifted, that I found someone I know, someone that I'm not by myself with these kids. She had told me, yeah, you can stay with us. And I was thinking, oh, thank God, just somebody. And I figured I'd just follow them and go with them, because at least I know them and I trust them.
Yeah, so, right. And what we're trying to do here is paint a picture of what that looked like. Folks, it was Kosovo out there. I mean, there was 1,000 people, and imagine being on that road and you don't know a single one of them. And, we had neighbors, obviously, that were stranded, but there were so many people. It was like crowds of people. It was kind of like tailgating at Tiger Stadium without the fun. It was just a bunch of people everywhere, but so scattered that you just didn't run into people you knew. It was just a bunch of strangers, and I'm sure very nice people, all of them, but very uncomfortable when you don't know. And this is a situation where people are hungry. It's hot, folks. It's August, middle of August. It had to be 100 degrees out there. And something worth mentioning, some of you may be saying, well, why not just go to one of your houses, your mother-in-law's house or your house? The water had not receded at that time. It was stagnant water. So after it quit raining, the water didn't move. So if you had 6 feet of water in your neighborhood, that 6 feet was still there. It just wasn't draining. So that's what we were dealing with at that point. There was no way to go back in your neighborhood. They all had the same amount of feet of water in them that they had, in the height of everything. So, you run into Karen, and, thank God for that. Were you wondering, where the heck's my husband?
Yes. When are you coming back? When are you coming back? And then what do I do? Do I go with them? Do I sit here and wait by ourselves? And then I'm scared. It's going to be getting dark soon. It was, and, then they said, her daughter was friends with some of my parents' neighbors. So she proceeded to tell me we're going to go to one of their houses. And I think it was probably the only house in the subdivision that didn't have.
And this was in her mother-in-law's subdivision, everyone, just to let you know, there was a house in there that did not flood. It did not get any water. It came close, but it did not get any water.
And maybe and it was probably a little bit, but it wasn't like the rest of the houses.
Yeah. So, obviously was there a point in there you're thinking, do I go to a shelter? Do I not go to a shelter? How am I going to find you?
Correct.
All those sorts of things. Did that cross your mind?
And then, of course, still no truck come back. So we're still waiting and waiting and waiting. They were trying to get a hold, I think, of friends who they could go stay with that, say, weren't flooded. Of course, you have no cell service at this time. So, everybody's just stuck.
Yeah, so
waiting patiently. Correct.
And so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to catch everybody back up to my involvement in all of this after I got back from my little hike all day long. And I arrived back, and obviously we had the conversation about her dad. And I did see her talking to Karen when I finally walked up. And I remember the first words out of your mouth were, "Where the hell have you been?" And I'm like, oh man, that's a story.
Yeah, a better word.
It was probably more colorful, but I was like, man, that is a story for another day. I can't even fathom to tell you what I've been through. And then we discussed her dad, and so I remember we also huddled with Karen and her husband and in that group, and there was some easy up tents and things like that out there that some people had set up. I remember we kind of all grouped around there, and as the day went into night, there were more people that we started to recognize.
Well, in the easy up tent, I think is once Karen said we're going to our friend's house, which ended up being my parents' neighbors who I did know, and we walked with them down the road to over there, and then they had already had the tents up, unless y'all helped them put up. I don't know how that was.
I believe, if I remember correctly, we all kind of helped put them up.
Somehow or another, maybe the neighbor that had dad, his bed, they had put to the side of the road there.
Yes, I remember that.
The kids kind of sat on that to give them something to sit on, just cushion and lay back, and and everybody everybody sat around.
Yeah, there was really nowhere to go. So,
but we're with people.
We're with people, thankfully. And there was a big, group of us at this point that had kind of grouped together. And I remember looking down my street, and, like I say, the water had not receded. So it still got the, 5+ feet all the way down the subdivision as you went deeper into the subdivision and got deeper and deeper as far as water. And I'll never forget this. I reached in my back pocket, and I realized I didn't have my wallet. And I'm like, oh man, this ain't good. I don't have my wallet. Not only is my house flooded, I have no ID. I have no debit cards. Not that you could use them where I was at, but I'm thinking if I'm somewhere where you can use them, of course I had no cash. So I said, I'm going to have to go in that water and see if I can find my wallet. And it would give me kind of an opportunity to assess the damage at my house fully. So off I went. And I told my wife, I said, I'm going to the house. I'm going to our house. And we were right in front of it on 16 at this point. And so off I go. And it got deeper and deeper and deeper. And literally maybe 5 houses from mine, I remember I was pushing off my tippy toes almost to keep my chin above the water. And so basically I was swimming at that point. As a matter of fact, I could literally touch the eave of some of my neighbors' houses swimming. That's how high that water was. So the whole time I'm thinking, you know, I didn't know if it had gotten in that big camper I had in my front yard that was my backup plan originally. I was pretty sure it did, but I'm thinking maybe that water just fell right underneath it, because that sucker was high off the ground. But sadly, as I got closer and closer to my house, I saw my wife's expedition, and all I could see was the top of it. It was totally inundated. And of my camper, I could see that it had went in the camper. So I'm like, well, there goes that plan. So I get to the door of my house, and it's the front door, and I'm pushing it, and I'm struggling to open it, you know, and I'm thinking it's the water pressure from the other side of the door. But it even seemed harder than that. And I remember I kind of took my shoulder and just pushed as hard as I could, and I nudged it just enough where I could slide in. And what was it blocking my door? My refrigerator had floated, turned sideways, floated like an ice chest, and was wedged against my front door. And that's why it was so hard for me to get that sucker open. So I'm like, wow. And you know, it was really strange that water, even depending on what part of the house you were in, was higher than other parts. It's like, it's almost like everything just slopes, you know, it's crazy. But I get in there, total destruction. It was a scene, y'all, from Titanic. I'm telling you, that was the first thing. If you've seen the movie Titanic, that was my first thought, was this looks exactly like Titanic. Everything was floating that could float. And I remember I put my feet on the ground, or on the floor in the inside of the house, and it was like skis. And I'm like, what the heck? It was like the floor was moving. Well, it was. I had the tongue and groove wood floors, and they were just the press down. They weren't the glue down. And they had floated. They had actually come apart and were just holding on to each other, and it was like you had skis on your feet. Everywhere you stepped, you were pushing down wood slats of the floor. And I mean, the house was ruined. And I'll never forget this. I'm looking around and I'm like, you know, is there anything that was saved? And there was a picture of my kids, me and my wife, that when they were babies, and is one of my wife's favorite pictures. And it was hanging just high enough on that wall that it didn't get water. Just high enough. I'm talking the water was right below the bottom of the frame. You know, a lot of pictures got ruined, but that one didn't. And it was almost like a positive thing in just a totally awful experience. And I'm like, thank God, thank God. And I remember I went over that picture and I pulled it off the wall and I held it above my head, and I set it on my mantle, because I knew the water wasn't going to rise anymore, and I knew it was dry there, but I was concerned about maybe the sheetrock getting weak because of the water and knocking that picture off the wall. So I thought that was a safe bet. And then we still have that picture to this day, one of the few things we were able to save. But that being said, I still got a job to do, and that's find my wallet. And I went in my office that was in my house, and I was a paper guy. You know, I file everything to a fault, still do to this day, but I wasn't one of those digital guys back then that scanned things. I had file cabinets, probably more than a lawyer. It was crazy. And I remember going in my office, and every file and every paper I ever had in 25 years in the paint business was underwater, because those file cabinets, as heavy as they were, had tipped over and floated and all of that. And I was like, man, this is 25 years of records just gone. how the heck am I going to find my wallet in here? And to tell you God's grace again, folks, look, my desk were tipped over. I had just bought a brand new Apple computer that was, literally the week before. It was obviously underwater, just ruined. And I thought the last place I set it was on my desk, and my desk at this time had kind of floated upside down. It's kind of hard to describe, but the water, y'all, to explain the water, you could not see anything. It was Amite River water. It was brown, murky, and you could not see a thing. But I went to the one spot, I remembered leaving it, and I stuck my arm under that water, and y'all, I put my hand right on my wallet. I could not believe it. I said, that's my wallet. And I pulled it up, and of course it's soaked, but hey, it's there, and the cards are still there. And I knew if nothing else, I could, the numbers were legible. It might not swipe, but those numbers are legible. And I took that wallet, put it in my pocket, and kept surveying damage. I walked to the back of my house and looked, and everything's ruined, just everything. I remember thinking my son, my wife had painted his walls, and she had spent like an entire summer putting dinosaurs all over these walls. And look, talented, but my wife's not a painter. This took her a long time, and it was a lot of detail, and she had all these cute dinosaurs all over this wall. And I remember walking in there and seeing that I knew these walls were gonna have to come out, and that to me was just awful. And I was like, man, it hurt my heart that that was going to have to be destroyed and pulled out and all of that. So I leave there. I go to the back where my backyard would be, to the back door, and I look out, and it blew my mind, y'all. I had a deck back there, a wood deck that was enormous. And during this flood, there was so much water that this deck was on like concrete piers. But it wasn't locked down on those piers. Basically, you build the deck, and it's the concrete piers that have notches in them, and you put the wood in between those notches. And there was probably, I don't know, this deck had to weigh 1,000 pounds, but it was a boat. That water actually had so much power, it lifted it up, turned it sideways, and floated it under my back patio. It got wedged at one point between the two brick sides of the back patio and just got stuck sideways. And my first thought was, how in the heck am I going to get that back into place? And I'm going to have to unscrew every board, all the things that guys typically think. And so then I got my wallet, and I said, man, I'm just getting the hell out of here. It was a horrible sight. The water was still up. I knew it couldn't be safe in there for too long anyway. Spiders everywhere floating. I remember the spiders were crazy. They just come out of that grass and they just float, and there's millions of them. And so, obviously you got to worry about snakes and all that stuff too. So I was done hanging out in the flood water. So I get out of there, and it was the longest walk back to the front of that subdivision I've ever had in my life, because I knew the question I was going to get when I got there from my wife. And that was, how's the house? And so how do you look at your wife, your kids, and tell them you've lost everything? So my first thought was, well, I could tell a little white lie and just say I didn't, I think some stuff was saved, and something to maybe sugarcoat it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be honest about it. I'm just going to tell them. And acceptance is the first part of healing, right? And so I got to the front of that subdivision. Sure enough, my wife and kids are gathered around, still with Miss Karen and all these people. And sure enough, just like I knew, the first question out of my wife's mouth was, well, What's it look like? And I'll never forget, I looked her right in the eyes, and this is in front of everybody. And I said, there's nothing left. There is absolutely nothing left. No clothes, nothing. I didn't even tell her about the picture that had been saved at that point, because honestly, by the time I made it to the front of that subdivision, that was in and out of my mind. I just, it's all gone. It's basically how I put it. And even my kids cried, your kids grasping something like that isn't like parents grasping something like that. Kids, everything's replaceable to a kid, right? Their parents buy everything. They don't realize maybe sometimes the magnitude of what just happened, but they got it. They got it. My wife broke down right there, and it was a moment, right? And we all hugged, and it was just a moment. And it was also another moment to me, because I can tell you that at that point in time, at that exact point in time during that flood, that's when the switch changed. And my method of thinking went from, oh my gosh, panic and all of that, to, I'm going to get us out of this. I'm going to get us out of this. And I took, for me as a man, I wanted that responsibility. I wanted that challenge, because the situation we were in was the situation we were in. There was no changing that. Now it's time to fix it, right? Let's get that water down. Let's get in that house. Let's gut those walls. Let's do what we got to do, because I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. I had a responsibility to a family. So this, as a situation as it was, at this point, it's getting dark. And, we're like, where are we going to sleep? Right. And, so I had a plan, and I remembered her mom's car, which was parked underneath, her garage, or in her garage. Probably didn't have water in it, I was thinking. And I'm like, we can just start the car and we can sleep in the car. So, folks, that's exactly what we did. It did have a little water in it. And I remember the floorboard was wet. Let me tell you, it was an inch from ruining that vehicle. The floorboard was wet. So it had went over the tires and had gotten in the doors, but just enough to kind of wet the floorboard. Other than that, it was fine. And it started, which was the big thing, but it had air conditioning. And it wasn't in a moldy house, right? So that's where we slept that night. And I slept, look, y'all, throughout these 3-day ordeal that we were already in, I had slept maybe 4 hours. I think I got 3 hours of sleep that night. I fell asleep somewhere around 3 o'clock and woke up at 6, and we're back in it, right? The next day, we kind of meandered out to that street again and kind of grouped up with people. And I knew I've got to get my family out of here. People were getting hungry. They were getting ornery. They were getting aggravated. There were some shady characters walking up and down the road, these looters with looting on their mind, and I could look in their eyes and tell. And this was a situation where I didn't know when there was going to be help. It could be weeks. It could be, literally weeks. The water had receded in her mother's neighborhood, a good bit. There was like sludge and mud on her mom's floor. But outside of that, it was like the water was traveling downward. So while it had receded in her mom's neighborhood and a little bit in my neighborhood across the street, it was moving further towards Port Vincent area, if you're familiar with Livingston Parish, which was the only way kind of out. And that, or so you thought that was a way out. And I'll get to that on the next episode. So we're going to end this one. But I'll tell you what, in episode 6, we're going to talk about trying to get my family out of there that day. It is unbelievable. So I appreciate you listening and watching. Wendy, thank you for sharing your story. I know that was not easy for you. But I think people can get a grasp of the feeling of different people in our community that went through this. And some people's situation were different than others. They had people they were taking care of, like your situation, where it just made a really, really crappy situation that much worse and that much harder. So we're going to pick it up in episode 6 with that. I guess I would title it The Great Escape. In this episode, we could title The Great Rescue. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you all for supporting. Please share this with anyone you feel may enjoy it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.